In the rolling hills of Kentucky, where morning mist still clings to forgotten meadows, stands the crumbling remains of what was once Pleasant Hill, a Shaker community that vanished overnight in 1834. Over 300 souls simply disappeared, without a trace, leaving behind only empty buildings and a silence so profound that locals still refuse to walk those grounds after dark. For nearly 2 centuries, the state of Kentucky has kept the official record sealed, buried in archives that few are brave enough to examine. But recently uncovered testimonies from a visiting Ohio inspector reveal a truth so horrifying that it challenges everything we thought we knew about America's religious communities. What happened at Pleasant Hill wasn't just a tragedy. It was 27 years of systematic terror disguised as holy devotion. Before we uncover the dark truth that authorities tried so desperately to hide, I need to ask something of you. This channel isn't for everyone, only for those brave enough to face the darkest corners of American history. If you're one of the select few who seeks these hidden truths, hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments what state you're listening from. Now let's step back in time to discover how a family's greed transformed a sacred community into something far more sinister. What began in 1807 as a beacon of spiritual purity would become one of Kentucky's most carefully concealed secrets, orchestrated by a family whose corruption ran deeper than anyone could imagine. The year was 1807, and the Second Great Awakening was sweeping across Kentucky like wildfire. In this atmosphere of religious fervor, Pleasant Hill emerged as a sanctuary for those seeking to live according to Shaker principles: celibacy, communal property, and separation from the world's corruption. The community, nestled in the fertile bluegrass region near Harrodsburg, attracted hundreds of converts who willingly surrendered their earthly possessions for the promise of spiritual perfection. At the heart of this seemingly devout community stood the Richardson family, whose influence permeated every aspect of daily life. Elder Samuel Richardson, a tall man with piercing gray eyes and a voice that could command any congregation, had arrived from Ohio claiming direct ordination from Mother Ann Lee's original disciples. His carefully maintained appearance, always dressed in simple but immaculate Shaker garb, and his encyclopedic knowledge of Shaker theology convinced even skeptical visitors of his authenticity. His wife, Sister Martha Richardson, had publicly renounced their marriage to maintain Shaker celibacy while secretly continuing their relationship in the privacy of Samuel's expanded quarters. Martha possessed an almost supernatural ability to read people's motivations and fears, a skill she used to devastating effect in managing the community's complex social dynamics. Her soft-spoken manner and gentle smile masked a calculating intelligence that rivals found both intimidating and irresistible. Their family network extended throughout the community like the roots of an ancient oak. Their eldest son, Brother Ezekiel Richardson, a broad-shouldered man with his father's commanding presence, managed the community's extensive agricultural operations. He had transformed Pleasant Hill's farming from subsistence agriculture into a commercial enterprise that supplied produce markets throughout the Ohio River Valley. His younger brother, Brother Caleb Richardson, served as the community's unofficial security chief, monitoring members' private conversations and correspondence with an efficiency that would have impressed any modern intelligence operation. Sister Rebecca Richardson, Samuel and Martha's eldest daughter, oversaw the women's dormitories and new convert orientation. At 28, she had never married and channeled what observers described as fierce maternal instincts into managing the female members of the community. Her ability to break down psychological defenses and rebuild personalities according to Richardson family specifications was legendary among those who survived her spiritual counseling sessions. The youngest Richardson daughter, Sister Patience, maintained the community's official records and correspondence. Despite being only 24, she possessed a gift for forgery that allowed her to craft convincing letters in any handwriting style after studying a person's writing for just a few days. Her meticulous record-keeping created the documentary facade that protected the family's operations from outside scrutiny. Samuel's brother, Brother Jeremiah Richardson, controlled the community's profitable furniture workshops. A master craftsman who had learned woodworking before the family's corruption began, Jeremiah maintained the quality standards that made Pleasant Hill furniture sought after throughout Kentucky and beyond. His workshops employed nearly 50 community members in what appeared to be dignified craftsmanship, but functioned more like a forced labor operation. Brother Isaiah Richardson, Samuel's cousin, managed their lucrative seed business that supplied farms across 3 states. Isaiah's monthly travels to distant customers provided perfect cover for activities that would have horrified his business partners. His gentle demeanor and obvious expertise in agricultural matters made him welcome at farms from Ohio to Tennessee, where his true purposes remained carefully hidden. Martha's sister, Sister Hannah Collins, supervised the community's kitchens and food distribution. Her control over nutrition allowed the family to reward compliance and punish dissent in ways that appeared natural to outside observers. Hannah had studied the effects of various herbs and substances, knowledge she applied with scientific precision to manage the community's psychological and physical health. Even the extended family played crucial roles. Samuel's elderly mother, Mother Sarah Richardson, served as a living symbol of the community's supposed spiritual authenticity. Her presence lent credibility to Samuel's claims of long-standing Shaker connections, while her apparent frailty made her an unlikely suspect in any wrongdoing. In reality, Mother Sarah was the family's strategic mastermind, whose decades of experience in manipulation guided their long-term planning. Brother Nathan Richardson, Samuel's youngest brother, managed the community's external relationships with local authorities and neighboring communities. His charm and apparent sincerity had convinced Sheriff William Morrison of Mercer County that Pleasant Hill was a model religious community deserving protection and support. Nathan's regular donations to local churches and civic organizations purchased goodwill that proved invaluable when questions arose about the community's activities. The community's reputation spread throughout Kentucky and beyond. Visitors marveled at the pristine buildings constructed with materials purchased through the community's legitimate business profits. The perfectly ordered gardens, maintained by members who worked from dawn to dusk, produced vegetables and herbs that supplied both the community's needs and commercial markets. The apparent contentment of the nearly 400 members impressed even skeptical observers who saw no obvious signs of coercion or abuse. What outsiders couldn't perceive was the intricate web of surveillance and control the Richardson family had woven throughout Pleasant Hill. Every aspect of community life flowed through family members who reported directly to Samuel and Martha during their nightly strategy sessions. No decision, no matter how trivial, occurred without Richardson approval. No member could leave the grounds without a Richardson family escort, and even brief trips to nearby Harrodsburg required detailed justification and careful supervision. The family had created what modern psychologists would recognize as a perfect totalitarian environment. Information flowed only downward from the leadership, while surveillance ensured that any dissent was quickly identified and addressed. The community's isolation, both geographical and psychological, made resistance seem not just futile, but unthinkable to most members. New converts underwent a carefully designed indoctrination process that stripped away their previous identities and rebuilt their personalities according to Richardson's specifications. This process, supervised primarily by Rebecca and Martha Richardson, typically took 6 months to complete. By its conclusion, new members had been psychologically transformed into compliant followers who viewed questioning the family's authority as tantamount to questioning God himself. The community's daily routine reinforced this control at every turn. Members rose at 4:30 each morning to the sound of Brother Caleb's bell, ate breakfast prepared under Hannah Collins's supervision, and spent their days at assigned tasks that had been carefully designed to prevent private conversations or independent thinking. Evening worship services, led by Samuel Richardson with various family members playing supporting roles, combined genuine spiritual elements with subtle psychological manipulation that reinforced dependency and discouraged critical thinking. The first crack in Pleasant Hill's perfect facade appeared on a frigid February morning in 1812, when Brother Thomas Whitman, a successful merchant who had donated his entire estate to the community 5 years earlier, began asking uncomfortable questions about the community's finances during a public meeting. Brother Thomas had arrived at Pleasant Hill in 1807 as one of the community's earliest and most generous converts. A widower in his 50s whose children had died in a cholera outbreak, he had found comfort in the Shaker promise of spiritual family and eternal purpose. His donation of a thriving dry goods business and substantial property holdings had provided much of the capital that allowed the Richardson family to establish their operations on such a grand scale. For 5 years, Thomas had been the model community member. He worked tirelessly in Brother Ezekiel's agricultural operations, served as a mentor to younger converts, and never questioned the leadership's decisions. His transformation from successful businessman to humble Shaker brother impressed visitors and reinforced the community's reputation for spiritual authenticity. But Thomas's business background made him uniquely qualified to notice discrepancies that escaped other members' attention. His trained eye for financial details, combined with his access to certain operational records through his agricultural work, gradually revealed inconsistencies that troubled his conscience. The seed business profits reported by Brother Isaiah didn't match the amounts Thomas had observed during his visits to customer farms. The furniture workshop revenues seemed impossibly high given the number of pieces he saw being produced. Most puzzling of all, the community's membership numbers didn't align with the consumption records he maintained for feed and supplies. Brothers and sisters, Thomas stood during the monthly community meeting, his weathered hands holding several pages of carefully calculated figures. I've been praying about some concerns that weigh heavy on my heart. Our blessed community has prospered beyond measure, yet I see contradictions in our records that trouble my soul. The silence that followed was deafening. Around the packed meeting hall, Richardson family members exchanged glances that lasted mere seconds, but communicated volumes. Samuel Richardson's face remained serene, his hands folded peacefully in his lap, but those who knew him well noticed the subtle tightening around his eyes. Sister Martha's gentle smile never wavered, yet her knuckles whitened as she gripped her prayer book with increasing pressure. The seed business, Thomas continued, his voice gaining strength as he warmed to his topic. Brother Isaiah reported profits of $800 from Ohio customers last quarter. But when I delivered supplies to those same farms, I calculated sales that should have generated nearly $1,200. Where has this missing money gone? Brother Caleb Richardson rose from his seat near the door, ostensibly to check the room's temperature, but his movement positioned him between Thomas and the exit. Sister Rebecca's eyes never left Thomas's face, cataloging every expression and gesture for later analysis. Around the room, other Richardson family members made subtle adjustments to their positions, creating an almost imperceptible web of surveillance and control. Furthermore, Thomas pressed on, apparently oblivious to the dangerous territory he was entering. Our membership rolls show 400 souls, yet our food consumption suggests we're feeding barely 250. Brother Jeremiah's furniture workshops claim to employ 50 members, but I count only 37 who regularly report for that duty. These numbers don't reconcile, and as stewards of God's bounty, shouldn't we demand accuracy in our accounting? The response came not from Samuel, but from Mother Sarah Richardson. whose elderly voice carried surprising authority across the silent hall. "Brother Thomas," she said, her tone mixing gentle correction with unmistakable warning, "your concerns show a heart still attached to worldly thinking. In our blessed community, we trust that our leaders, guided by divine wisdom, manage all temporal matters for our spiritual benefit. Perhaps you need time for prayer and reflection to overcome these doubts that trouble your faith." Samuel Richardson nodded gravely, his expression radiating paternal concern for a wayward child. "Brother Thomas, your dedication to our community's welfare touches my heart deeply, but perhaps your mind has been clouded by memories of your former worldly life. Sister Hannah, would you prepare Brother Thomas some of your special chamomile tea? I believe he needs rest and reflection to clear his thoughts of these troubling concerns." The meeting continued for another hour, but Thomas Whitman's questions had fundamentally altered the atmosphere. Other members avoided eye contact with him, suddenly finding urgent reasons to examine their prayer books or adjust their clothing. The Richardson family's responses to subsequent business items carried an underlying tension that hadn't existed before Thomas's intervention. That evening, Thomas was found dead in his dormitory bed by Sister Rebecca, who discovered the body during her routine evening inspection of the men's quarters. Her tearful announcement to the gathered community painted a picture of peaceful transition. Brother Thomas passed gently in his sleep, called home by the Lord after confessing his sin of doubt during evening prayers. His last words were an apology for allowing worldly concerns to cloud his spiritual vision. The community accepted this explanation with the resigned faith they'd been conditioned to embrace. After all, questioning the leadership's account of events was tantamount to questioning God's will. Brother Thomas's funeral the following day became a lesson about the dangers of allowing business concerns to interfere with spiritual submission. But young Sister Mary Caldwell, who cleaned the dormitories each morning, noticed details that would haunt her for decades. When she entered Thomas's room to prepare it for cleaning, she was struck by the bitter almond smell that lingered despite the room's windows being open all night. Thomas's fingernails had turned a distinct blue color that she'd never seen on any corpse, including her own grandfather, who had died peacefully at home. Most disturbing of all, she discovered traces of white foam around Thomas's mouth that Sister Rebecca had carefully wiped away before calling for help. Mary watched in growing horror as Brother Caleb Richardson collected all of Thomas's personal papers, including the financial calculations that had started the crisis. These documents, along with Thomas's ledger books and correspondence, were burned in the communal fireplace that very night during what Samuel Richardson described as a cleansing ceremony to purge worldly attachments from our sacred space. The community's reaction revealed how thoroughly the Richardsons controlled information flow and emotional responses. Within hours of Thomas's death, Sister Martha was leading prayer circles where members confessed their own doubts and worldly thoughts, creating an atmosphere where questioning leadership became synonymous with spiritual failure. Brother Ezekiel organized intensive work details that kept potential questioners busy from dawn to dusk, leaving no time for private conversations or independent reflection. Brother Jeremiah led evening discussions about the dangers of challenging spiritual authority, using Thomas as a cautionary tale of what happened when faith wavered and worldly concerns corrupted pure hearts. These sessions, which became a regular feature of community life, served the dual purpose of preventing future dissent while identifying members whose responses suggested they might harbor similar doubts. The most chilling aspect of the community's response was how quickly Thomas Whitman's memory was systematically erased. His personal belongings were redistributed within days, his work assignments transferred to other members, and his name removed from community records except for a brief death notice. Within a month, it was as if Brother Thomas had never existed at all. his questions forgotten and his concerns dismissed as the ravings of a mind corrupted by worldly attachment. In the months following Thomas Whitman's death, a pattern began to emerge that would continue for over 2 decades, growing more sophisticated and ruthless with each iteration. Members who asked probing questions about finances, who expressed desire to visit family outside the community, or who showed signs of wanting to leave Pleasant Hill, began experiencing what the Richardsons termed spiritual crises requiring special intervention. Brother Jeremiah Richardson developed what became known as the retreat system for handling dissent. When someone questioned community practices or showed signs of independence, they would be assigned to special prayer and fasting retreats in isolated cabins scattered across the community's extensive property. These retreats, always supervised by various Richardson family members, were presented as opportunities for troubled souls to reconnect with divine purpose through solitude and meditation. The retreat cabins, constructed under Brother Jeremiah's direction in remote corners of the community's thousands of acres, were designed to appear rustic and spiritual while serving their true purpose as holding facilities. Each cabin contained a single room with basic furniture, heavy wooden shutters that could be barred from outside, and doors that locked only from the exterior. The cabin's isolated locations, connected to the main community only by narrow paths through dense woods, ensured that any sounds from within would never reach other members. Brother Caleb Richardson managed the logistics of identifying retreat candidates. His network of informants throughout the community reported private conversations, observed relationships, and monitored correspondence for signs of disloyalty or independent thinking. His methods were so subtle that most members never realized they were being watched, attributing chance encounters with Caleb to coincidence rather than systematic surveillance. The selection process for retreats followed carefully developed criteria. Recent converts who asked too many questions about absent family members were prime candidates, as were longer-term members who showed signs of developing leadership potential that might threaten Richardson authority. Members who demonstrated excessive attachment to possessions they had donated, who expressed homesickness during community meetings, or who formed close friendships that might enable organized resistance, also found themselves selected for spiritual intervention. Sister Hannah Collins managed the community's correspondence with remarkable sophistication, ensuring that worried family members received carefully crafted letters explaining their loved ones' sudden departures or deaths. Her penmanship was flawless, and she had studied each member's writing style with scientific precision, enabling her to forge convincing final letters that would satisfy distant relatives for years to come. Hannah's forgery operation required extensive preparation and planning. She maintained detailed files on each community member's background, including samples of their handwriting, information about distant relatives, and knowledge of their pre-conversion lives that could be referenced in false correspondence. When someone was selected for elimination, Hannah would prepare multiple letters to be sent over several months, creating the illusion of an ongoing correspondence that gradually explained the person's absence. Parents in Ohio received touching notes from children they would never see again, describing spiritual revelations that called them to missionary work in untamed Western territories. Siblings in Pennsylvania got detailed accounts of peaceful deaths following brief illnesses, complete with descriptions of final words and burial ceremonies that never occurred. The letters were masterpieces of emotional manipulation, designed to provide closure while discouraging further inquiry. Brother Isaiah Richardson's seed business provided perfect cover for disposing of evidence and maintaining the community's external relationships. His monthly trips to distant farms offered opportunities to bury bodies in remote locations across Kentucky, Ohio, and Tennessee, while simultaneously conducting legitimate business that reinforced his reputation as a trustworthy merchant and devout Shaker brother. Isaiah's routes were carefully planned to serve multiple purposes. His legitimate customers provided alibis for his presence in distant locations, while his knowledge of remote farm properties gained through years of business. Relationships enabled him to identify burial sites that would never be discovered. He developed relationships with isolated farmers who welcomed his visits and never questioned his occasional requests to camp overnight on their property during bad weather. The disposal process was methodical and efficient. Bodies were transported in specially modified seed wagons that appeared to contain normal agricultural supplies, but included hidden compartments designed for their grisly cargo. Isaiah's reputation for punctuality and reliability meant that his overnight absences during trips were never questioned by customers who assumed he was maintaining his demanding schedule. Local authorities, when they occasionally inquired about missing persons, were shown immaculate records maintained by Sister Patience Richardson. Her documentation system was a marvel of bureaucratic deception, demonstrating through carefully crafted paperwork that individuals had left voluntarily for other communities or had died of natural causes with proper burial in the community cemetery. Patience's record-keeping extended far beyond simple membership logs. She maintained detailed medical histories that could explain sudden deaths from natural causes, travel documentation that supported claims about members departing for distant communities, and correspondence files that included both genuine letters and Hannah's forgeries. Her organizational skills ensured that any official inquiry could be answered with convincing documentation that withstood casual scrutiny. The psychological control the Richardson family maintained was perhaps more chilling than their physical crimes. They had created a closed system where questioning authority was equated with spiritual failure, where blind obedience was the highest virtue, and where members policed each other's thoughts and behaviors. The remaining community members weren't just victims. They had been transformed into unwitting accomplices in their own oppression. The community's population remained steady at around 400 members, despite the constant stream of new converts arriving monthly and the mysterious disappearances that occurred with increasing frequency. This stability was maintained through what Brother Caleb privately called natural selection, the systematic removal of anyone who posed a threat to family control, balanced by aggressive recruitment of new converts whose property donations financed the operation's expansion. New arrivals were carefully screened by the Richardson women, who had developed sophisticated methods for identifying potential troublemakers before they could influence other members. Sister Rebecca's intake interviews, conducted under the guise of spiritual counseling, actually served to assess each convert's psychological profile, family connections, and potential value to the community. Those deemed dangerous were marked for early elimination, while valuable converts underwent intensive indoctrination designed to strip away their previous identities. The indoctrination process, refined over years of practice, combined genuine spiritual elements with systematic, psychological abuse that created trauma bonds between victims and their abusers. New converts were isolated from contact with the outside world while being subjected to alternating periods of intense attention and deliberate neglect that broke down their psychological defenses and made them desperate for approval from community leaders. By 1825, Pleasant Hill operated like a well-oiled machine of exploitation, its various components working together with mechanical precision that would have impressed any efficiency expert. The Richardson family had refined their methods over 18 years of practice, transforming what had begun as opportunistic crimes into a sophisticated criminal enterprise that generated enormous profits while maintaining an impeccable public reputation. The family's division of labor had evolved into a complex organizational structure that maximized efficiency while minimizing risk. Samuel Richardson maintained his role as spiritual leader and public face of the community, delivering inspiring sermons that drew new converts regularly while keeping existing members focused on heavenly rewards rather than earthly concerns. His charismatic presence had become legendary throughout Kentucky's religious communities, with ministers from other denominations frequently citing Pleasant Hill as an example of successful Christian living. Martha Richardson had developed what amounted to a science of psychological manipulation, studying each community member with the intensity of a naturalist observing specimens. Her methods for breaking down individual resistance and rebuilding personalities according to family specifications had become so refined that the process typically took only 3 to 4 months to complete. She maintained detailed psychological profiles on every member, updating them regularly based on observations from her network of female relatives and informants. The community's expansion had enabled more sophisticated criminal operations that generated multiple revenue streams. Brother Ezekiel Richardson's agricultural operations now supplied produce to markets in Louisville, Lexington, and Cincinnati, generating enormous profits that never appeared in the books shown to members. His workforce of unpaid community members, maintained through psychological coercion rather than physical restraint, provided labor costs that made Pleasant Hill farms impossibly profitable compared to conventional operations. Brother Jeremiah Richardson's furniture workshops had similarly expanded, producing pieces that were sold throughout the Ohio River Valley and marketed as authentic Shaker craftsmanship. The quality remained high because Jeremiah genuinely understood woodworking, but the labor was essentially slavery disguised as religious devotion. His workers put in 12 to 14-hour days, producing furniture that sold for premium prices, with profits flowing entirely to the Richardson family's private accounts. The most insidious development was how the family had begun selling community members to buyers who operated plantations and industrial facilities throughout the South and Midwest. This human trafficking operation, coordinated primarily by Brother Isaiah during his seed business travels, provided the highest profit margins of any family enterprise while explaining the mysterious disappearances that might otherwise have attracted unwanted attention. The selection process for trafficking victims followed coldly calculated criteria. Younger members with valuable skills but dangerous independent tendencies were prime candidates, as were individuals whose family connections made their continued presence at Pleasant Hill potentially problematic. The buyers, who believed they were purchasing indentured servants rather than free citizens, paid substantial sums for workers who came with fabricated documentation proving their voluntary servitude. Sister Rebecca Richardson had become the family's specialist in breaking down new converts and identifying those suitable for different faiths. Her psychological assessment process, disguised as spiritual counseling, enabled her to categorize newcomers into groups: valuable long-term assets who would remain at Pleasant Hill, potential trafficking victims who could be sold for profit, and dangerous individuals who needed immediate elimination. Rebecca's methods combined genuine spiritual guidance with systematic abuse that created powerful trauma bonds between victims and their abusers. She had studied the conversion experiences of legitimate Shaker communities, then perverted these techniques to serve the family's criminal purposes. Her sessions left converts psychologically dependent on her approval while stripping away their connections to previous identities and relationships. The community's isolation had become both geographical and psychological, with members existing in a closed information environment where the Richardson family controlled every source of knowledge and interpretation. Located on thousands of acres of family-controlled land, members rarely encountered outsiders except during carefully supervised visits to nearby towns. Even these excursions were managed by Richardson family members who monitored all interactions and reported any conversations that suggested disloyalty. The family had cultivated extensive relationships with local authorities that provided protection from official scrutiny. Sheriff William Morrison of Mercer County had become essentially a paid ally, receiving regular donations to his campaign funds and personal accounts in exchange for his assumption that Pleasant Hill was a model religious community deserving protection rather than investigation. These relationships extended throughout the region's power structure. Brother Nathan Richardson's charm offensive had won allies among local merchants, politicians, and religious leaders who viewed Pleasant Hill as a valuable economic and spiritual asset to their communities. The community's legitimate business operations provided substantial tax revenue and employment opportunities that made local officials reluctant to investigate rumors or complaints. The psychological control mechanisms had evolved to include elaborate rituals and ceremonies that reinforced member dependency while identifying potential dissidents. Samuel Richardson's worship services combined authentic Shaker elements with subtle psychological manipulation that created altered states of consciousness where critical thinking became impossible. These services often lasted for hours, leaving participants emotionally drained and psychologically vulnerable to suggestion. Evening confession sessions, led by various Richardson family members, served multiple purposes beyond spiritual guidance. They provided opportunities to identify members harboring doubts or resentments, created public pressure for conformity through shame and guilt, and enabled the family to gather intelligence about private conversations and relationships that might threaten their control. The confession process had become increasingly elaborate, with different family members specializing in extracting specific types of information. Sister Rebecca focused on relationships and emotional attachments that might enable resistance, while Brother Caleb concentrated on practical concerns like escape plans or contact with outside authorities. Sister Hannah monitored confessions for information about family members outside the community who might become problematic if they began asking questions. Mother Sarah Richardson, despite her apparent frailty, had emerged as the family's strategic mastermind whose decades of experience in manipulation guided their long-term planning. Her ability to appear harmless while orchestrating complex criminal operations had become legendary among family members, who referred to her privately as the General in recognition of her tactical brilliance. Sarah's influence extended to every aspect of the operation, from the selection of new territories for expansion to the development of new techniques for psychological control. Her understanding of human nature, gained through 70 years of observing and manipulating others, enabled her to predict how individuals would respond to various pressures and rewards. Her strategic vision had transformed the family's criminal enterprise from opportunistic theft into a sustainable business model that could theoretically continue indefinitely. The expansion of their operations had required increasingly sophisticated methods for maintaining security and preventing exposure. The family had developed elaborate communication systems that enabled coordination across their various enterprises while minimizing the risk of interception by hostile parties. They used coded language in their correspondence, maintained separate financial accounts for different operations, and created false identities that could be used if rapid escape became necessary. The beginning of the end for the Richardson family's 27-year reign of terror came from an unexpected source. Their own success had attracted attention from the legitimate Shaker leadership in Ohio. In late 1833, the Ohio Union of Shaker Communities decided to send Elder Joseph Meacham, one of their most experienced and respected leaders, to evaluate Pleasant Hill for potential inclusion in their formal alliance of authenticated Shaker settlements. Elder Meacham was not the typical visitor the Richardsons were accustomed to managing. A genuine disciple of Mother Ann Lee's teachings who had spent 40 years in Shaker communities across New York, Ohio, and Pennsylvania, he possessed an intimate knowledge of proper Shaker practices, record-keeping, and community structure that made him nearly impossible to deceive. His mission was to verify that Pleasant Hill truly followed authentic Shaker principles before recommending them for official recognition and inclusion in the union's collective decision-making processes. The evaluation request had come after years of glowing reports about Pleasant Hill's spiritual achievements and economic success. The Ohio leadership had been impressed by accounts of the community's growth, their reputation for quality craftsmanship, and their apparent success in maintaining celibacy and communal property arrangements over more than 2 decades. The decision to send Meekum represented both an honor and a potentially devastating threat to the Richardson family's carefully constructed facade. Samuel Richardson initially welcomed the evaluation with apparent enthusiasm, confident that his family's carefully constructed facade would fool another religious leader. After all, they had successfully deceived hundreds of visitors over the years, including ministers from other denominations who had left Pleasant Hill convinced of its spiritual authenticity. The family's experience in managing inspections had given them confidence that they could control the process and manipulate Meecham's conclusions. But Meecham's first requests immediately raised alarm bells throughout the Richardson network. Unlike previous visitors who were content with guided tours and carefully staged demonstrations of community life, Meekum wanted to examine financial records going back to the community's founding in 1807. He insisted on speaking privately with randomly selected members, without Richardson family supervision or preparation. Most troubling of all, he brought his own accounting ledgers and expected to reconcile Pleasant Hill's reported membership numbers with their consumption records, work output, and correspondence logs. The scope of Meecham's investigation became clear during his first meeting with Samuel Richardson, conducted in the community's main meeting hall before an audience of senior members. "Brother Samuel," Meecham said in his quiet but authoritative voice, "the Ohio Union has developed standardized procedures for evaluating potential member communities. We'll need to review your membership rolls, financial records, correspondence files, and burial registers for the past 5 years. We'll also need to conduct private interviews with at least 50 members selected through random drawing." Samuel's response revealed the first crack in his usually perfect composure. "Elder Meecham, we're honored by your visit and eager to demonstrate our commitment to Mother Ann's teachings. However, our record-keeping follows Kentucky practices that may differ from Ohio standards. Perhaps we could arrange a more informal evaluation that better reflects our unique circumstances." Meecham's expression remained pleasant but firm. "I appreciate your regional considerations, Brother Samuel, but the union's standards apply equally to all communities regardless of location. Authentic Shaker practices are universal, not subject to regional variation. We'll begin with the membership rolls and burial registers tomorrow morning." That evening, the Richardson family held an emergency meeting in Samuel's private quarters, their voices hushed, but their panic evident to anyone who might have been listening. Mother Sarah Richardson, despite her apparent frailty, took charge of the strategy session with the authority of someone accustomed to managing crises. "This man knows things we can't fake," she whispered urgently. "He's asking for documentation we can't provide without exposing everything. We need to delay, deflect, and if necessary, eliminate the threat before he completes his investigation." Brother Isaiah Richardson was the first to articulate the scope of their vulnerability. "He's asking for records going back 5 years, but our problems go back much further. The membership numbers alone will expose us. Our books show 400 members, but we've got maybe 250 actually living here. The burial registers are even worse. We've got graves for people who supposedly left for other communities." Sister Hannah Collins added another terrifying dimension to their predicament. "He's already identified inconsistencies in the correspondence I've been maintaining with other communities. He knows Shaker writing conventions I never learned. And he's asking questions about Mother Ann Lee's teachings that our people can't answer because they were never properly instructed." The family's initial attempts to delay and deflect Meecham's investigation only intensified his suspicions and strengthened his resolve to uncover the truth. When they claimed certain records were stored in a building that had been damaged by recent storms, he pointed out that none of the buildings showed signs of weather damage. When they suggested interviewing specific members who could vouch for community practices, He insisted on selecting interview subjects himself through random drawing from a complete membership list. Brother Caleb Richardson's surveillance network, so effective at monitoring community members, proved useless against an investigator who understood the importance of maintaining operational security. Meekum varied his routines, conducted interviews in different locations, and seemed to possess an intuitive awareness of when he was being watched. His questions during member interviews revealed a depth of knowledge about authentic Shaker practices that made it impossible to maintain their deceptions. Most dangerously, some of the community's surviving members began responding to Meecham's genuine spiritual presence in ways that terrified the Richardson family. Sister Mary Caldwell, who had witnessed Brother Thomas Whitman's suspicious death over 20 years earlier, found herself drawn to Meecham's obvious authenticity and began sharing her long-suppressed observations about members who had mysteriously disappeared. The psychological effect of Meecham's presence on community members was profound and immediate. For the first time in decades, they encountered someone whose spiritual authority didn't depend on fear, manipulation, or psychological abuse. His gentle questions about their experiences, his obvious knowledge of authentic Shaker practices, and his genuine concern for their spiritual welfare created an atmosphere where long-buried doubts and memories began to surface. Brother Jeremiah Richardson, whose furniture workshops provided crucial income for the family's operations, found his workers becoming increasingly unproductive as they spent time talking with Meekum about traditional Shaker craftsmanship techniques they had never been taught. The conversations revealed gaps in their knowledge that made it obvious they weren't receiving proper instruction in authentic Shaker methods. Sister Rebecca Richardson's carefully controlled dormitory system began breaking down as female members started asking questions about Shaker practices they'd never heard of before Meecham's arrival. Her authority, so absolute for so many years, suddenly seemed questionable when compared to the obvious authenticity of their visitors' spiritual knowledge and gentle demeanor. The investigation took a decisive turn when Meecam requested access to the community cemetery for a private memorial service honoring departed members. The Richardson family couldn't refuse such a reasonable request without appearing suspicious, but they also couldn't allow him to examine the burial grounds too closely without risking exposure of their crimes. Brother Caleb volunteered to escort Meecham to the cemetery, hoping to control what he observed and limit his time among the graves. But Meecham's trained eye immediately noticed inconsistencies that had escaped casual observers for decades. The burial patterns didn't match the death dates in official records, and the condition of grave markers suggested many more interments than the documented deaths could account for. "Brother Caleb," Meecham said quietly as they stood among the headstones, "I notice some irregularities in your burial records. This grave marker indicates Brother William died in 1829, but your correspondence files show letters from him dated 1830. How do you explain this discrepancy?" Caleb's response revealed the desperation that was beginning to infect the entire family. "Elder Meecham, perhaps there was an error in our record keeping. Our sister Patience maintains extensive files, but even the most careful record keeper can make mistakes when dealing with so many community members over so many years." Meecham's expression remained thoughtful but skeptical. "I understand that record keeping can be challenging, but Shaker communities traditionally maintain extremely accurate documentation of deaths and departures. The inconsistencies I'm observing suggest systematic problems rather than occasional errors." That night, Meecam made a discovery that would expose the full scope of the Richardson family's crimes and bring their 27-year reign of terror to an end. On the night of March 15th, 1834, Elder Meecham made a discovery that would expose the full scope of the Richardson family's 27-year reign of terror. Unable to sleep due to his growing suspicions about the discrepancies he had uncovered during 3 weeks of investigation, he decided to examine the community's cemetery by moonlight, hoping to reconcile burial records with actual grave sites without Richardson family supervision. What he found was a graveyard that told two completely different stories. The official cemetery, maintained for visitors and official inspections, contained approximately 40 graves, with proper headstones dating from 1807 to 1834. The markers were well-crafted, obviously expensive, and arranged in neat rows that suggested careful planning and maintenance. But Meacham's trained eye, sharpened by decades of experience managing authentic Shaker communities, noticed inconsistencies in the ground itself that revealed a far more sinister reality. Areas throughout the cemetery showed subtle depressions and variations in soil color that suggested many more burials than the headstones indicated. The earth in these unmarked sections had been disturbed and allowed to settle, forming barely perceptible indentations that would escape casual observation, but were obvious to someone who understood how burial grounds evolved over time. The vegetation patterns also revealed the truth. Certain areas supported different plant growth than others, indicating soil that had been repeatedly disturbed and replaced. More chilling still, when he examined the dated graves more carefully, Meacham realized that many of the supposed death dates corresponded exactly with his list of members who had allegedly left Pleasant Hill to found new communities or visit distant relatives. The timeline was impossible. How could someone die and be buried at Pleasant Hill on the same day they were reported to have departed for Ohio or Tennessee? His systematic examination of each grave marker revealed a pattern of deception so elaborate that it demonstrated years of careful planning. Members who had supposedly died of natural causes were buried next to those who had allegedly left for missionary work in distant territories. The dates formed a chronicle of systematic elimination that coincided perfectly with moments when the community faced potential exposure or internal resistance. Meacham's investigation was interrupted by Sister Mary Caldwell, who had been watching from her dormitory window and recognized an opportunity to finally reveal the truth she had carried for over 20 years. Moving silently through the darkness, she approached the cemetery with the desperate courage of someone who knew this might be her only chance to expose the horrors she had witnessed. "Elder Meacham," she whispered urgently as she approached his lantern-lit figure among the gravestones. "God has sent you to reveal the truth we've been too terrified to speak. What you're seeing here is only a small part of what the Richardson family has done to this community." In a conversation conducted in hushed tones among the silent graves, Mary revealed the horrifying truth she had carried in terrified silence for decades. "I've seen them bury people in the middle of the night," she said, her voice shaking with suppressed terror and long-awaited relief. "The Richardson family, they don't just control this community, they've been systematically murdering anyone who threatens their power or questions their authority." Mary's testimony, delivered in broken whispers as they crouched between headstones to avoid detection, painted a picture of systematic elimination that went far beyond occasional murders. To maintain control, the Richardson family had created what amounted to a death camp disguised as a religious community, where members who questioned finances, expressed homesickness, showed leadership potential, or simply knew too much about the family's activities, were methodically eliminated. "Sister Hannah Collins keeps poisons in the kitchen stores," Mary revealed, her words tumbling out with the urgency of someone finally able to speak truth after years of enforced silence. "I've seen her preparing special meals for people who are asking too many questions. Brother Thomas Whitman wasn't the first. He was just the first time I was brave enough to really look at what was happening." The scope of the family's criminal network became clear as Mary continued her desperate confession. "Brother Caleb Richardson knows which members plan to leave before they even tell anyone. He reads their private letters and listens at dormitory doors. He has a list of people he calls problems, and they disappear within days of being identified. And Brother Jeremiah," she continued, glancing nervously toward the main buildings to ensure they weren't being observed. "He's the one who disposes of the bodies. He has burial sites all across Kentucky, places where he buries people during his furniture delivery trips. I've seen him loading covered wagons at night and I've seen him return with empty wagons and dirt under his fingernails. The most horrifying revelation was the scope of the family's operations beyond simple murder. Mary described a human trafficking network that sold the community's younger, healthier members to plantation owners and industrial operations as indentured servants. "They don't kill everyone," she explained. "The young ones, the strong ones, they sell them. Brother Isaiah's seed business is just a cover. He's actually delivering people to buyers throughout the South." Elder Meacham realized that Pleasant Hill wasn't a corrupted Shaker community. It was a criminal enterprise that had never been legitimately Shaker at all. Mary's knowledge of the community's early history revealed that the Richardson family had likely murdered the original Shaker leaders who established the settlement, then assumed their identities to inherit a ready-made community of trusting, obedient followers. "The real Elder Samuel died in 1808, Mary whispered, "just 1 year after the community was founded. I was just a girl then, but I remember him being different, gentler, more concerned with our spiritual welfare than with profits and control. The man who calls himself Samuel Richardson now is someone else entirely." The implications of Mary's revelations hit Meacham with devastating force. Not only had the Richardson family been committing mass murder for over 25 years, but they had done so while systematically destroying the authentic Shaker community that had originally been established at Pleasant Hill. They had perverted genuine spiritual seeking into a tool for exploitation and murder, using people's deepest religious longings as weapons against them. As dawn approached, Meacham faced a terrible choice that would determine the fate of the nearly 250 community members who remained alive. If he confronted the Richardson family directly with his knowledge, he would almost certainly become their next victim, and his death would eliminate the only outside witness to their crimes. But if he left Pleasant Hill to seek outside help, the family might eliminate all the remaining witnesses before authorities could intervene. The weight of nearly 300 lives lost, and the 250 souls still trapped in this nightmare pressed upon him as he knelt among the silent graves. Mary Caldwell waited beside him, her fate now linked to his decisions. Around them, the cemetery held its secrets in the pre-dawn darkness, bearing witness to decades of systematic murder disguised as religious devotion. Meacham's decision would determine whether the Richardson family's reign of terror continued, or whether justice would finally come to Pleasant Hill after 27 years of carefully concealed horror. Elder Meacham's decision to flee Pleasant Hill in the pre-dawn hours of March 16, 1834, carrying Mary Caldwell with him as a witness, set in motion the events that would finally bring justice to the Richardson family's victims. They rode through the night to Harrodsburg, where Meacham convinced Sheriff Morrison and a federal marshal to organize an immediate raid on the community, armed with Mary's detailed testimony and Meacham's documentation of the numerous discrepancies he had discovered. The federal authorities' involvement proved crucial, as it later emerged that Sheriff Morrison had been receiving regular payments from the Richardson family for his willful blindness to their activities. The federal marshal, Captain James Crawford, brought a detachment of 12 men and legal authority that superseded local jurisdiction, ensuring that the Richardson family couldn't use their network of corrupted officials to escape justice. What the authorities discovered upon their return to Pleasant Hill was a scene that haunts Kentucky law enforcement records to this day. The Richardson family, realizing their exposure was inevitable, had made a desperate decision to eliminate all witnesses and escape with whatever portable wealth they could carry. Of the 250 community members who had been alive when Meacham arrived 3 weeks earlier, only 37 were found still living when the raid commenced. The surviving members, discovered locked in basement storage rooms beneath the community's main buildings, told stories that revealed the true scope of the Richardson family's crimes over nearly 3 decades. They had been confined without food or water for 2 days, while the family debated whether to kill them all or select the most valuable for sale to distant buyers before fleeing Kentucky permanently. These survivors, chosen for their youth and physical capabilities rather than any mercy from their captors, represented the strongest evidence of the family's human trafficking operations. Several had been marked for sale to plantation owners in Mississippi and Alabama, with transportation arrangements already completed and payments received. Their testimony revealed a systematic operation that had sold hundreds of community members into slavery while maintaining the facade of voluntary departures for missionary work. The physical evidence discovered during the raid supported every horrific detail of the survivors' testimonies. Hidden burial sites were found throughout the community's extensive property, containing remains that showed signs of poisoning, strangulation, and blunt force trauma. The burial sites were methodically organized, with detailed maps found in Brother Jeremiah Richardson's workshop indicating the location of every hidden grave. Searchers discovered over 150 unmarked graves scattered across the community's thousands of acres, many containing multiple bodies that had been disposed of during the same time periods. The condition of the remains, combined with artifacts found in the graves, confirmed that the Richardson family had been systematically murdering community members since at least 1812, with the killing accelerating dramatically in recent years as their confidence in their methods grew. In the Richardson family's private quarters, investigators found detailed ledgers documenting their human trafficking operations with the precision of any legitimate business enterprise. The records included the names of buyers, the prices paid for individual community members, and detailed descriptions of the merchandise being sold. The trafficking operation had generated over $40,000 in profits over the past decade, far exceeding the income from their legitimate business activities. Perhaps most chilling was the discovery of Martha Richardson's personal journal, which revealed the psychological techniques the family had developed to maintain control over their victims. The journal, written over 15 years, documented systematic experiments in human manipulation that would have impressed modern psychologists with their sophistication and ruthlessness. Martha's writings showed no remorse for the hundreds of lives destroyed by her family's activities. Instead, they contained clinical observations about which methods proved most effective for different personality types, detailed analyses of how to break down psychological resistance, and strategic planning for expanding their operations to other states. Her entries revealed a woman who viewed other human beings as resources to be exploited rather than souls deserving of respect and compassion. The journal also contained detailed psychological profiles of every community member, updated regularly. Based on observations from her network of female relatives and informants, these profiles included assessments of each person's value as a worker, their potential for resistance, their usefulness as breeding stock for future generations of workers, and their suitability for various types of exploitation. The Richardson family's fate was swift and decisive, though their trial revealed details that shocked even experienced law enforcement officials. Samuel, Martha, and their 6 adult children were arrested and charged with multiple counts of murder, kidnapping, fraud, and human trafficking. The trial, conducted in Frankfurt throughout the summer of 1834, drew national attention as newspapers across the country covered the unprecedented scope of their crimes. The testimony presented during the trial painted a picture of systematic evil that challenged contemporary understanding of human depravity. Witness after witness described decades of psychological torture, physical abuse, and systematic murder carried out with the efficiency of a business operation. The evidence was so overwhelming that the jury required only 2 hours to return guilty verdicts on all charges. All 7 Richardson family members were convicted and sentenced to death, with executions carried out in October 1834, before crowds that included many former community members who had escaped or been sold into slavery years earlier. The executions provided a sense of justice for the victims, but they couldn't restore the lives that had been stolen or heal the trauma that would affect survivors for the rest of their lives. The 37 survivors faced the overwhelming challenge of rebuilding their lives after decades of psychological and physical abuse that had stripped away their identities and connections to the outside world. Many struggled with what we would now recognize as severe post-traumatic stress disorder, unable to trust religious communities, authority figures, or even their own judgment about other people's motivations. Several survivors never recovered from their experiences at Pleasant Hill. The systematic psychological abuse they had endured left them unable to function independently in normal society. They spent their remaining years in state institutions, haunted by memories of the horrors they had witnessed and the friends they had lost to the Richardson family's systematic brutality. Others found the strength to rebuild their lives with the help of genuine religious communities that provided psychological support and practical assistance. The Ohio Union of Shaker Communities, led by Elder Meacham, established a special fund to help Pleasant Hill survivors transition to normal life, providing financial support, job training, and counseling services that helped many eventually achieve some measure of peace and stability. The state of Kentucky quietly sealed most of the Pleasant Hill investigation records, concerned that publicizing the full details would damage the region's reputation and discourage religious settlement throughout the Bluegrass region. The community's buildings were eventually demolished under state supervision, and the land was sold to private farmers who were told only that the previous religious community had disbanded following financial difficulties. The secrecy surrounding the case meant that many details never became public knowledge, allowing rumors and speculation to replace factual accounts of what had actually occurred at Pleasant Hill. This deliberate obscurity served the state's interests in preventing copycat crimes and protecting Kentucky's reputation, but it also meant that the victims' stories were never fully told and their suffering never adequately acknowledged. Modern historians who have gained access to the sealed records estimate that the Richardson family murdered or sold into slavery over 400 people during their 27-year operation. The actual number may be even higher, as their record-keeping focused on profits rather than comprehensive documentation of their crimes, and many victims may have been eliminated without any record of their existence at Pleasant Hill. This mystery shows us how easily religious faith can be weaponized by those who understand the psychology of control and manipulation. The Richardson family succeeded for nearly 3 decades because they exploited people's deepest spiritual longings, transforming the desire for divine connection into a tool of oppression and murder. Their success depended on the isolation they created around their victims, cutting them off from outside support and making resistance seem impossible rather than merely difficult. The Pleasant Hill tragedy reminds us that evil often disguises itself as virtue, using the language of spirituality and community to mask the most brutal exploitation. The Richardson family's ability to maintain their facade for so many years demonstrates the importance of maintaining connections between religious communities and the broader society, ensuring that isolation never becomes so complete that abuse can flourish undetected. What do you think of this story? Do you believe everything was revealed, or might there be even darker secrets buried in Kentucky's sealed archives? The state's decision to keep most records classified suggests that the full scope of the Richardson family's crimes may never be completely understood. Leave your comment below and share your theories about what other horrors might still be hidden in those forbidden files. If you enjoyed this tale and want more horror stories like this, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and share with someone who loves mysteries. See you in the next video.